So before I can start talking about like specific actions I take, I need to baseline a little bit how I think about a career myself. So to me, a career is a marathon and not a sprint. So what I mean by that is when I thought about my own career, I'll just use like 18 years old as kind of the beginning of a career. So if you think about when you start your career, you can start at 18, number I use. And in the US, the full retirement age is 67. So that ends up being a 49-year career. So when I think about what it means to have a career that long, I have to think about certain things. Like number one, I have to think about burnout. If you burn too hard, if you sprint in the middle of the marathon, then you'll experience burnout, right? Like it's just logical that you have to pace yourself to some degree. Now, the pacing and the timing is individual for everyone on what their gates and the time they want to run the marathon is. But I do think about that when we set our expectations. I personally set my career expectations two ways, right? Which is short term and medium long term. I think long term, meaning out 20 years, is too far. And we'll talk more about that later. But really, then when you think about what the pandemic was, being like 2.5 years as of today in October of 2022, then that only comes out to 5.1% of a career. And I would caution that it would become easy for us as we're experiencing these challenges to make some big decisions that could have lasting implications further on. So before anybody points it out, I mean, I'll be the first to say that I don't think everybody plans on having a 49-year career when they're 18, but some people want to accelerate that faster, right? Which means that they want to have more money earlier so they could maybe enter their second act or do something else that, where the money's not the driver. But the only point I'm really trying to make here is that when I think about a career and I talk to others about a career, it's really about a longer period of time. I mean, clearly there's the year you get reviewed on a year. We'll talk about a 1 in 5 year plan later, but the concept of a career being a long period of time is what I really want to kind of set as what I use as when I think about when I set goals for my career. So let me use kind of a analogy here for a moment. Now, let's talk about money. I know everybody likes to talk about money, but let's talk about how we manage money. If I had $1,000 today, I could do certain things with that $1,000. I could go meet an immediate need or a fix. I could go buy a watch. I could take a trip. I could put a down payment on an Apple device. Yes, that is a dig on the Apple tax. And I do love Apple products. But I would use that money today to maybe have some fun, go to a nice restaurant. Point being is I could spend the money short term, or I could take that money and invest it for long term, for it to grow, to have compounding interest. So as if I was feeling a little bit down, I could go have a nice meal with that $1,000, have a great experience, or I could invest it, say, in a long-term mutual fund. And as anybody who invests money in a stock, but it's always for time. Like I know some people will expect to get really fast returns, but Warren Buffett and all the long-term investors say you go into those kinds of investments for the long-term gains. And when you think about dollar cost averaging as a concept, you put in a little bit of investment every month on schedule, and you hit the highs, you hit the lows, and you don't look for an immediate return on that money, but it will return more money down the road. So, I don't want to say that people are going to drive their careers for money. I'm not really saying that. All I'm saying is that when you think about setting your career goals and you think about the time horizon of a marathon, and you think about that we all need money to pay bills, or you have to pay you can use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and obviously you have to have a house and utilities and food, and that changes, I believe, over the course of time based on where you are in your career. So that's where I say, when you look at the length of time of your career, you also, at least in my view, I look at where I'm at in my career, because that can change how I think about my investment of money or anything else, which we'll talk about in a minute, in, for the long term, and how I'm going to grow that later. So if we can just take a moment to say that you have money that you can dollar cost average over time to either a short-term use, meaning you can buy something nice or take a trip, which will give you some satisfaction today, or you could invest it in the long term. Now let's take that length of time and equate it to a career. So if dollars in your hand is the currency of financial health, what is the currency for your career? I've heard people tell me, well, the skills I have, or the competencies I have, or the experiences I have on my resume that helped me get the job. I would say that's not actually the vehicle. The currency vehicle is time and how you spend that time. So if you think about time you invest, whether shorter term to develop a specific skill or competency because maybe you receive some feedback, or an experience that you want to have, that you're going to work on a different project, or you're going to take a lateral move to another team. But I get the sense when I talk to certain people that they think that the rate of return in that time is different between time invested in your career versus time invested in, say, the stock market. I equate that they're the same. When you invest, if you think about the dollar cost averaging chart, where it says you're not always going to buy at the high, sometimes you'll buy at the low, and you never really know when the market's going to change. Like, you don't always know what opportunities you're going to get based on the experiences and the skills that you're growing, that the charts can look pretty similar, because you might be investing in a skill or competency today, and it may not actually provide you an immediate result, but it builds out your portfolio of skills and experiences that allow you to advance your career or take on a bigger job or take on a bigger scope later. So I think of dollar cost averaging your career by investing time in different things, whether it's skills growth, competency management, or taking on new experiences, just like investing money in ETFs, in mutual funds, where you expect it to pay dividends down the road, and it's the collective portfolio that ends up working for you. Now, I'm not a financial analyst, and so I'm not going to say that, oh, well, I can invest that $1,000 a day and earn 12% by tomorrow. Yes, you can do that, but there's an associated risk that comes with that. And I would say that for the purposes of when I think about my career, I think about any job I have will provide me an experience, positive or negative, that I can take forward in my portfolio later in my career. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about a 1 and 5 year plan, but I don't believe personally in aimless investment. Like, I don't just take $1,000 in the market and throw it against something without doing some research on what kind of returns should I expect? Is it a high risk or a low risk? And so I would say that for a career, you might think about, and I know I've thought about for myself, am I making a targeted investment? Meaning, am I working on something towards something versus aimlessly taking a shot in the dark? So, when I see things online about employee disengagement and quiet quitting, doing minimal effort, I go back to my formula that works for me to say, well, if I invest my time doing nothing, how can I expect to grow something? Because what I've done to get to the level and job that I'm in now, I've already proven. And that's not going to be probably the level above me or the next big job above me. So if you invest nothing, how can you expect a return? So to me, it's a real interesting dynamic when I break it down for myself financially, is you have to do something in order to gain something. Now, and I will say that obviously you want to do what I call a targeted investment, meaning do you have feedback from your manager about why something's holding you back, or it's a skill or a competency or experience you don't have in your resume. But whatever the case is, when I hear people who feel disengaged or who are not motivated, I really try to think about, well, what's causing that for you? Do you feel stuck? Do you feel like you're not progressing? Well, if so, why is that? Like, is it through a lack of clarity? Is it through a lack of discussion with your manager about understanding what's expected for me to be considered for the next level or for the next big job? Or have I spent like time in a job where I have been aimlessly working on skills and not something specific? And so how you spend your time today really does matter. Now, I'm going to use an example, and I don't want anybody to kind of say that Milan is just saying that I need to work 24/7 and have no work-life balance and spend all this extra time managing my career. No, I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is every decision that we make has consequences. So if I decide I'm burnt out for a period of time and I just need to recharge, well, that might be a good use of my time versus trying to go add more stress to myself and growing my skills. But if I think about the long haul, if you're talking 49-year career potentially, then it's okay to have what I would say different motivators at different times while keeping your own personal health and your own personal motivation. And also what I would say is taking jobs in different aspects of your life, whether it's spring, summer, fall, or winter, which I'll talk a little more about later, and what motivates you during that period of time. So like I said, I'll use a personal example here that really came to play for me, which is many years ago when I was working at a previous company. I had a friend who I met at the company, worked there a lot longer than I did. And one day at lunch, he told me he kind of resented me. And I was like, well, what did I do? I'm sorry. I didn't realize I did anything. But what he resented was the fact that in a shorter period of time, I had grown past him in ladder levels in our career field. We're both kind of in the same discipline. And I remember distinctly for many years, and again, I'm not saying everybody needs to go work on Sundays, but I did. And my wife would come in with me into the office. I would work on stretch projects. I enjoyed the work. My stretch projects were very exciting to me. And so every Sunday I'd go into the office, work on these projects. My wife would bring a reading. She loved the coffee machines. I don't know why. It's just regular coffee, but she thought it was cool. They would go have lunch and go back to work. And he would actually make fun of me on Mondays, say, oh, you're in the office again on Sunday. I was like, well, I was, but nobody forced me to do that. But to me, that was me dollar cost averaging an investment. And again, that was where I was in my career many years ago. That was a good investment for me. I was okay doing it. It worked in my lifestyle, and it gave me dividends later in life through adding more value and learning new projects. And he had a great career, but when I talked to him about, he enjoyed his weekends and he went on hikes and all that kind of stuff, that's fine. And I'm not judging the behavior, but he had to recognize that there's a cause and effects, with time and investing, dollar cost averaging skills growth versus not. And those, for me, manifested in growing my career. So he had a good career. And again, it's not that he was personally resentful at me, but it kind of highlights that, at least in my own personal experience, that some investment is warranted. Because if you don't invest, again, you're not really going to grow. And it's also, I think, kind of a misnomer that every year is going to be an up year. Like dollar cost averaging, there will be years where you might not exactly get the review you were expecting, but you're learning a skill that will catapult you after that into a much higher realm of ownership, of scope, of delivery. So like dollar cost averaging has the up and downs as you invest year over year because you don't know when the highs or lows for. I say it's okay to have years where you may not actually score as high as you think you are because you are growing skills if you're being targeted about what you're working on. So it's just a natural progression that you can't really have an up year every year, because if you do, you're likely going to burn out, which then will reduce your overall effectiveness later. But there is this aspect of what are you investing over time? So what I would say with this analogy is that, number one, that time is the key factor of, at least for me, building your career and managing your career. and what you're doing with that time as an investment. Dollar cost averaging is kind of the analogy that I use. And that the job you're getting paid to do today, you've probably already shown the skills and experience and being able to meet that requirement, which is why you have that job today. But that's not what's going to elevate you probably to the next stage of your career, because there's a change in growth that has to happen there. And careers do change, and you will have to change over time in order to grow these skills to meet the new level. So I'm hoping that analogy kind of sets the stage for how I think about the timeline and horizon and the dollar cost averaging of the time that you have in your career to grow and compound your career over time.